Who could forget the first time they saw a dragon in EverQuest? This episode, we celebrate the dragons that populate Norrath in EverQuest and EverQuest II, their history, lore, art, and at times the sheer frustration or exhilaration at their defeat. And which zone of EverQuest is based off of this 80s movie? Find out in this episode of The EverQuest Show.
Not even close to the end, it's just beginning. Life is getting lighter while the days are getting brighter, yeah. Celebrate life, get excited about good times, good living, come on, shout it out. Hey! Take it up, take it over, take it out of control. Today I'm freeing my soul, and now you got me singing, oh, hey!
Welcome to the EverQuest Show. I'm Fading here in the EverQuest Show studios, and I have to admit, dragons are my favorite creatures in all of EverQuest. They come in all shapes and sizes, they dominate the stories and lore of Norrath. Even in a land filled with magic and strange creatures, dragons are the pinnacle of high fantasy. And this year is not only the year of Darkpaw, but 2024 is also the year of the dragon. So it would seem appropriate to count down my favorite dragons in Norrath, and yes, you know I love a top 10. So which do you think should take the number 1 spot? And we're going to look at how they evolve from EverQuest 1 to EverQuest 2, and yes, EverQuest 2 gets its own countdown as well. But first, not only do dragons play a huge role in the history of EverQuest, but they were also the first creatures to populate Norrath.
It is rumored amongst the most intelligent races of Norrath that first came the dragons.
It's time for a little Dragons 101, and if you're looking for some lore about the dragons of EverQuest, you've come to the right place. What follows is a very abridged Cliff's Notes recollection of the dragons of EverQuest.
The great crystalline dragon, ruler over the plane of sky, deposited life onto a lifeless planet, and with one swipe of her mighty claws, laid claim to the promise of a new world.
That crystalline dragon is Vishen, which, for those that didn't know, by the way, it's an anagram of the word heavens. Vishen is the god of the dragons, and those first dragons to be put on Norrath are known as the First Brood. And over time, more dragons are hatched and populate the world of Norrath. Vishen hasn't been seen since, but other gods took note of her acts on Norrath and decided to do the same. That's how we ended up with the elves, the dwarves, Kedge, and all of the other races on Norrath, designed as a form of checks and balances on the dragons and each other. At some point, 2 dragons of opposing elements decided to mate, an act that was forbidden by Vishen, the result of which was a prismatic offspring. While the dragons that mated are unknown, that prismatic dragon was named Kiriferm. The parents of Kiriferm were punished by death, and the orphaned Kiriferm was raised instead by Kildrukan. And very quickly the strength and hunger for power was evident as Kiriferm grew into adolescence. The dragons went about ruling themselves, establishing Vishen's code of laws to rule dragonkind. The most important was, 1, dragons of opposing elements must never mate, and 2, that dragons cannot kill other dragons. While the dragons agreed on these ideas, they were split on whether to interfere or intervene with what they considered the lesser races of Norrath, or whether they should remain out of the affairs of Norrath. Thus the dragons splintered into 2 factions, the Claws of Vishen, who inhabit the ancestral lands of Velius, and the smaller faction of dragons who flew to Kunark to set up the Ring of Scale. The Claws of Vishen were led by Lord Jelinek and ruled over the city of Skyshrine, established a holy temple in the Scars of Velius, which were supposedly the marks Vishen's claw made on the planet. Meanwhile, the Ring of Scale established Vishen's Peak on the continent of Kunark, where it wasn't too long before the lesser races like the Ixar became much more of a concern. Back in the Claws of Vishen, Kiriferm's hunger for power and Kildrukan's belief that the powerful Kiriferm would reunite the Claws of Vishen and the Ring of Scale led to a war within the Claws of Vishen. Lord Jelinek battled Kiriferm, and after a clever ruse by Jelinek, Kiriferm was tricked by Jelinek and 4 powerful Crusader dragons into being put into a deep sleep, since by Vishen's code, dragons could not kill another dragon, even a prismatic one. and thus Kiriform became known as the Sleeper. The Claws of Vishen are still ruled by Jelinek on Velius, and the Ring of Scale continued their rule in Kunark, though their interaction with the Ixar directly impacts the history of that continent. The Sathir line of emperors, from Venril down to his great-grandson Ganak, have direct impacts on dragonkind, from wars between the two to the creation of new races like the Sarnak, a cross between dragon and Ixar created by Etrib Sathir, and the Sokakar, a cross between a dragon and a froglock. All of these events happen before we even begin our adventures in Norrath, and through our actions and adventures, and 30 expansions of happenings, the world and history of Norrath unfolds before our eyes.
Look, that's a very condensed version of what happened, but the lore and history surrounding dragons in EverQuest is why I think they're the most interesting creatures in Norrath. And look, we can't have an episode about dragons without my top 10 list countdown. So get your raid memories unlocked, put your own list together, and comment below, because I'm going to count down my list of the top 10 dragons in EverQuest.
Anytime I start a countdown, I like to set the ground rules and the basis for how I made my decisions. Of course, after 30 expansions and 2.5 decades, the sheer number of dragons in the game is incredible, filled with stories, war, civil war, raids, and just some of the coolest looking models in the game. Now, for consideration on my list, its impact in the story of Norrath, or the impact on the players in the game, had to be significant. But I also considered a few other things, like the way the dragon looked, or its uniqueness in the game, or just sheer raid difficulty, or how memorable it was in some cases. Now, as you expect, you'll disagree with some of my choices, but when you do, make sure you comment below to let me know exactly what you think should have been added, taken away, or maybe just ranked differently. So, here we go. Number 10, Zanamek Nismurthafan. The number 10 spot on our countdown is not truly a dragon at all. It's a mechanical creation built by the gnome Nitram Anazak that doesn't quite behave as planned. It's also the first dragon you encounter in your planar progression. Now, this was a nice change from the dragons in Velius, and since there were no dragons on Lucklin, it was a nice treat to see a huge beast in one of the earlier zones, Plane of Innovation. Number 9, Wuxi. Who hasn't ported into the Awakening Lands only to immediately be attacked by arguably the most infamous Druish dragon? Wuxi guards the Awakening Lands and conveniently spawns and lingers right at the Druid port-in. Not surprisingly, since the dragon itself is a Druid class, or at least casts Druid spells. Adventurers often use the port to ease the trip to Kael Drakel or Plane of Growth, and if you're on bad terms with the Claws of Vishen, then you'd better look out, because you'll have a rather large Druid immediately dotting you and nipping at your heels. Number 8, Faradar. The daughter of Harladar and Jaladar, Faradar has quite the influence in the Ring of Scale faction of dragons. After her father was slain in the battle with Ganak Sathir, Faradar assumed the role of the leader of Ring of Scale and is the final raid target in Vishen's Peak. The other dragons of Vishen's Peak will come to her aid if they are not displaced before you attack Faradar. She makes the number 8 spot on our list for essentially being the final in-game boss of the Kunark era of EverQuest, and for her leadership position in the Ring of Scale. Number 7, Vishimtar. In an expansion called The Dragons of Norrath, it's no surprise that the final fight of the expansion was a notorious raid with the dragon Vishimitar. First of all, the dragon model was incredibly good looking for a time when most of the dragons in the game were still using the old Kunark or Velius models. That is, if you could look at the dragon during the fight, it was an incredibly involved raid at the time. 75% in swirling shadows would spawn, some of which you should avoid killing, and 50% drakes started to spawn that needed to be snared and kited away or otherwise dealt with, and then the final 25% of the fight involved curing a curse, running to an NPC, saying a phrase, and that would unlock 1% of more of the fight at a time. All the while, any deaths added to the chaos of the fight. A win was incredibly satisfying, but the fight was terribly maddening. Number 6, Trachanon. He's not only one of the most memorable dragons in Kunark, dwelling in the bowels of old Sebelis, but he's a prominent figure in the storyline of the Iksar. More importantly, the Iksar's dealing with dragons and the fall of the Sebelesian Empire. Being a member of the Ring of Scale, Trakanon believed that the mortals of Norrath were something to be influenced, handled, and dealt with. Trakanon was also rumored to be gifted with sight into the future, and his visions led him to believe that the Iksar were a threat to the Ring of Scale on the continent of Kunark. Defying the Ring of Scale, Trakanon decided to attack the Iksar and summoned a squall to destroy the Sebelesian navy, carrying Ryle Sathir, the emperor of the Sebelesian Empire, who was also the son of Veneral Sathir. This act led to a war between the dragons on Kunark and the Iksar, and eventually led to the fall of the Iksar Sebelesian Empire. As punishment for Trakanon's defiance, since death was a punishment that defied the second law of Vishen, he was banished to the now ruined depths of Sebelis, which is where we first meet him in EverQuest.
And while we're talking about Trakanon, his fight with the Iksar resulted in the death of his most trusted ally, who led the attack against the Iksar city of Veksar.
Sitting below the waters of the Lake of Ill Omen lies the entrance to what was once a thriving Iksar city, a sort of Sebelesian resort town built on top of the supposed healing spring waters of Kunark. The designer behind the zone tells us how an unlikely 80s movie with a similar destroyed city theme inspired its development.
I'm Alan Bond, senior artist. I build just about everything except the characters. So I do the environments, objects, armor, housing items. I like all the zones that I build. They're all equally good to me, but recently I've heard a lot of people really liked the first zone I worked on, which was Veksar. I based that off of the Escape from New York movie. Yeah, that one goes in and out the buildings because they do the same thing in the movie. They're on the street, they're inside buildings, back out on the street, inside buildings. So there's a theater in there, same as in the movie.
The theater that Alan mentions is now home to the spirit of Trakanon's former general, the slain dragon Garudon. He attacked the city, and as it was knocked from its pillars, he was caught in the snare trap set by the Iksar. In his last breath, trapped in the dome and brought down by the Iksar soldiers, he crashed through the ceiling of the theater. The city is now destroyed, but as it collapsed, the healing waters flooded the valley and diluted the healing properties. Garudon can still be found roaming Veksar as an undead dragon, not just in EverQuest, but also in EverQuest II.
And speaking of EverQuest II, and before we get to the second half of our top 10 list of EverQuest dragons, a few weeks ago I asked if there was anyone out there in the community interested in assisting the EverQuest Show. After all, it takes a lot of work to put these episodes together. I'm always interested in getting more players involved. So if you're interested in helping out, just go to EverQuestShow.com and click on the Help Wanted story. Here's an example of what you could be doing for the EverQuest Show as our friend Yvette counts down their top 5 favorite dragons of EverQuest II.
Hi, I'm Yvette of the Antonia Bale server. Join me as I count down my top 5 favourite dragons of EverQuest II. Kicking off our top 5, Veksar, found in the Withered Lands. As an NPC dragon, she is impossible to kill, spending her time flying around the Withered Lands, cursing any adventurer or crafter who dare to fly in her presence. Get caught in her brain, and you'll find yourself plummeting back down to the ground. And, well, depending on how far up you were, the way down is just as far. Veksar is more, well, annoying than anything else, but her death count is certainly rising. Number 4 on my list is the sweet little Zygos in Vishen's Peak. While not a tricky dragon to do battle with, the fact that Zygos falls asleep mid-raid and dreams of his fellow dragons taunting him, I feel it speaks to that little voice inside of us all. Who of us hasn't fallen asleep and dreamt that their entire raid force was calling for them to get online and zone in? Number 3, Venika. The number 3 spot on my list goes to everyone's favourite emo dragon, Venika. The first of our reoccurring villainous dragons in Norrath.
Have you come to worship me?
It was back in May 2005 when Veksar captured the entire Froglock race, and adventurers were tasked with their rescue. And upon his defeat, Veksar retreated to the Halls of Seeing to await those same adventurers in the Kingdom of Sky expansion.
Do you seek my favor by offering up your lives?
Number 2. Lord Nagafen. Probably one of the first dragons you think about when asked to name a dragon in the world of EverQuest. Injured in a battle against an army of Dakota, Lord Nagafen is currently trapped below the land of Lavastorm at the very bottom of Soyasek Eye. His tattered wings are almost useless and make it impossible for him to reach the surface. Instead, he dwells within his lair, where players will need to learn Draconic in order to speak with him. And adventurers will want to speak to him if they wish to attain their prismatic weapons or gain access into Death Toll. Before I get into my number 1 spot, just want to say an honourable mention to Lady Vox, who is also a dragon that's close to my heart. Her story is one of tragedy, and without her, I don't think this whole thing would have worked. My number 1 dragon of EverQuest II is the legendary Norrath. And, well, spoiler alert for a 20-year-old storyline, Norrath is in disguise for most of the time that you meet him.
I am Captain Drake Varlos.
He talks directly to you as Captain Varlos and also as a Sage of Ages. He ensures that the adventurers who washed up on his ship are nudged on their way to discover where the prismatic egg created by Lord Nagafen and Lady Vox is hidden. The questline, which rewards the prismatic weapon, is one of my favourite questlines in this game, and this is why Norrath is my number 1 dragon in Norrath. I've been Yvette for the EverQuest Show, and that's my top 5 dragons of EverQuest II. And now over to you. Who are your top 5? Who would you include? Let me know in the comments, and also let me know on social media. Thank you, bye bye.
I really love the EverQuest II dragons, especially those updated models, but here are a few other dragons that got the update treatment from EverQuest I to EverQuest II. EverQuest has certainly come a long way in the last 25 years, but we are only halfway through our countdown. So let's get to the top 5 spots in our countdown of the dragons of EverQuest.
Number 5, Lady Vox. Deep within the icy caverns of Permafrost Keep, early adventurers of EverQuest met their first dragon. Lady Vox was one of the 2 original dragons in the game, and while there is significance in being one of the first, her impact in the history of Norrath is rather minuscule. Her and her mate Nagafen were both banished for violating or attempting to violate Vishen's first law that dragons of opposing elements shall not mate, lest Norrath see the arrival of another prismatic dragon like Kiriferm the Sleeper. Formerly of the Ring of Scale, Lady Vox now remains imprisoned in Permafrost Keep. Number 4, Lord Jelinek. Jelinek is one of the original dragons to be deposited on Norrath by Vishen, the so-called First Brood, and it is his involvement in the history and lore of Norrath and dragons that earns him the number 4 spot on the list. After the birth of Kirifurm, the prismatic dragon, and the subsequent war of the dragons that ensued, Jelinek became the leader of the claws of Vishen, the dragons that would inhabit Velius. It was Jelinek who saw the danger in the unchecked power of Kirifurm. After a battle with Kirifurm in the Velius skies, he was left wounded and assumed dead. His alleged death was only a ruse though, so that he could hatch the plan to put Kirifurm to sleep, since killing another dragon would violate Vishen's second law. In addition, the war with the giants of Velius also took a toll on Jelinek, as Hasagra, Jelinek's mate, is killed in the Kale arena. Jelinek now resides in the dragon city of Skyshrine, leading the claws of Vishen in their many unwanted turmoils throughout Norrath. Number 3. Quarm. What's not to love about a 4-headed elemental dragon with each head symbolizing a different element? The final raid target in the Plane of Time is the culmination of defeating the elemental planes and the gods. Quarm was the guardian of the prison of Zabuxaruk, and he's a dragon supposedly created by the 4 elemental gods themselves. However he got there, he's one of the biggest NPC models in EverQuest, and a memorable raid when your guild is working through the Plane of Time. Number 2. Kirifurm. The Sleeper, the Awakened, the Prismatic Dragon, the prophetic savior of dragonkind. Kirifurm has gone by many names. The product of 2 dragons of opposing elements, it is not known who the parents of Kirifurm are. In dragon history, Kirifurm is arguably the most important in the entire timeline of dragons on Norrath, leading to the War of the Dragons, and the creation of the laws of Vishen, that dragons of opposing elements shall not mate, and that dragons shall not kill other dragons. But most importantly, outside of Norrath, the Sleeper is most known for being the unkillable dragon that players eventually, well, killed. A feat that was not intended by the developers. When not killed, Kirifurm is awakened by the players and is able to wreak havoc upon the dragons of Norrath again for their acts against him. But before we get to the number 1 spot, here are a few honorable mentions that didn't make the top 10. Number 1. Lord Nagafen. He is the quintessential fire-breathing dragon. What high fantasy game would be complete without a big bad fire-breathing dragon? That dragon is Lord Nagafen. His story of love for Lady Vox and their plans to mate led him to his imprisonment in Solisec's Eye. He has become an iconic symbol of EverQuest and has appeared in games throughout the franchise and beyond. We know him in EQ and EverQuest II in his updated form, but in EverQuest Online Adventures we saw Nagafen of the past. He spoke to us in Lords of EverQuest,
and threatens to betray my offspring to them.
And we expected to see him in EQ next, with artwork revealing his new style. And he also appeared in another cancelled game, Dragon's Prophet. He is the original true fire dragon of EverQuest, leading him to the number 1 spot on our countdown of dragons.
Okay, so there they are, the top dragons in both EverQuest and EverQuest II. So what do you think? You disagree, right? You think this dragon should have been here and that dragon should have been there. Well, that's okay. That's why YouTube made a comments section. So go ahead, comment below with your list of the top dragons in EverQuest, EverQuest II, or you can do both if you want. And let me know what you think. Thank you so much for continuing to support the channel. Share this video if you could. Make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you like the video. Ring the bell as well so you'll get updates for when the next episodes and updates are posted. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in Norrath, along with a dragon or two.
We gotta be the best we can be. And though sometimes we don't want to, still we gotta chase our dreams. Reach up and reach high, because we're gonna pull through and give it all we got, even though it can seem hard to catch and make it happen. But we can't start sliding, come on, and do what you gotta do to fight on. And so no matter what comes your way, nothing can ruin your day or even wipe your smile away. And by the time I'm up and out of my bed, I got 100 new ideas floating around in my head, with the hope for tomorrow, a dream that I can see of all the awesome things, the great people we can be. Or maybe by the music or the songs that I sing, I'll change the world with the simple message that I will bring. All I know is that it's out there, there's more to discover, a lot of good things we can learn from one another. Gotta